I have been relishing watching over and over again episodes of the series The Chosen. And if you're not familiar with it, it's an absolutely fantastic series that a man by the name of Dallas Jenkins put together. And so far it's 5 seasons. The 6th one is coming out in November, which gets to the crucifixion scenes. But he shows the season The Chosen, Jesus in the eyes of the apostles and the other disciples. And it's powerful because you're seeing how they are affected by the words of Jesus. And I find it very helpful because if we were alive back then, we would have been the same way. We would have been the disciples, people listening to Jesus. And seeing how the gospel is affecting them certainly touches our own hearts because we can relate to a lot of things that are going on in their lives from things in our own lives. And one of the episodes that I enjoy the most is the one that deals with today's gospel reading. The story of Jesus walking on the water and calling Peter to come out with him. Now, Dallas Jenkins, from the very beginning, mentions that in order to make 5, 6 seasons, he had to add some things to it. So he created a few storylines. He says, nothing of which contradicts anything in the scriptures, but that would help build up the story, and in the course of them, introduce things that would be able to give him the opportunity to make other points about the faith that Jesus would make, perhaps at another moment. And they bring the humanity of the apostles in this situation very much into play in what's happening in the story. And so with the story about Peter coming to Jesus in the water, he has it in the context of a situation that Peter is dealing with his wife, whom Dallas Jenkins names Eden. And at one point, while Peter is out on one of the preaching missions with Jesus, we discover that Peter's wife suffered a miscarriage. And of course, Peter wasn't there for it. And you can imagine everything that happened with him and his wife afterwards, the difficulty, the trauma with that. And here they are, they had just gone out and they were healing so many other people in other places, and now they're on the boat in the middle of the night, and Jesus comes towards them, and you can just imagine the scene. I mean, there's a horrible storm going on, the waves are breaking over the boat, they think they're going to sink, and in the middle of it they see somebody walking to them from the distance, and right away they think it's a ghost, and they start screaming. But Jesus says, don't be afraid, it is I. And look at what Peter says, the faith he has. He says, Lord, if it is truly you, call me to come out to you on the water. And he does. But Dallas Jenkins adds a little conversation in there while he's out on the water with him. Jesus says to him, does this strengthen your faith? And Peter says to him, faith is not the problem. I have faith in you. The problem is, I see you healing people, total strangers all over the place, and you didn't do anything for me, the one right near you. Why didn't you heal my wife and save my child? Huh? And he gives it to Jesus that way. And Jesus responds to him very sanely. He says to him, don't you understand why I allow people to endure trials? He says, doing so proves the integrity of your faith, the genuineness of it, and it strengthens you. He goes, this is strengthening you and Eden now, your faith in me. And Peter showed he had the faith. He actually is out walking on the water. He had the faith, but he had to trust in Jesus completely. And of course, then, he takes his eyes off Jesus, who says to him, just keep your eyes on me, look at me, and everything will be fine. But then when he starts to see the storm, instead he starts to sink. And Dallas Jenkins in The Chosen has Peter go all the way under the water. And then in a beautiful scene, you see the hand of Jesus come down, breaking the surface, grabbing Peter by the hand, and pulling him up. And as soon as he pulls him to himself, Peter clutches Jesus, hugs him, and starts saying, I'm sorry. He says, don't ever let me go. Don't let me go. And he repeats that over and over again as he's crying, don't let me go. Don't let me go. They get in the boat, he calms the storm, and he says the same thing, don't let me go. Don't let me go. And Jesus says to him, I'm with you. I'm with you always. I'm always here. And the message that he gives Peter in that is the message for all of us. I think all of us can relate to Peter on some level in our lives. We all endure storms, trials, things that take place in our lives. And we have faith in the Lord. We certainly do. We love him. Sadly, we know some people, once bad things happen, say, oh, God doesn't love me. God can't be good, because if God is so good, why does he let all this evil stuff happen? So no, God can't be good. And other people will even say, well, they become atheists because they say, oh, God can't exist because God wouldn't allow all this evil to happen. And they forget right away that God is not the cause of evil. God created paradise. He didn't want us living in suffering. He gave us the perfect world, and we blew it. Adam and Eve by original sin, and you and I, every time we commit our sins, we destroy the unity that God gave us. He's trying to show us how to fix it, how to reverse it, by keeping our eyes fixed firmly on Him and listening to Him and Him alone. And people who decide not to worship God, not to follow Him or believe in Him because they're suffering, well, suffering happens. Whether you believe in God or not, everybody endures it in our lives. And I often would ask them, well, okay, you've blamed God for it, but has that given you any healing? Where do you turn for help and your comfort? All you have now is a nice big object for your anger. You can blame God, but it doesn't give you any healing. And God is the one who can help heal us, the one to bring us through all of those trials, which will prove our faith and strengthen us in the process. When you think about it, if we didn't have any trials in the world, well, how could we not trust God? If He gave us the life of Riley, gave us everything we wanted, we'd be in grace. If we didn't say, well, God, thank you for everything you've given me. But when He allows us to endure trials, and still we trust in the Lord, that tests our faith. And it strengthens us in our ability to go out and be His presence to others. Remembering that God did not create evil. Satan did. The devil brings evil into the world, and he's hoping by doing evil things to us that we will blame God for it. And once we do that and we say, God, why are you doing this to me? If you are so good, you wouldn't let this happen. And every time I hear somebody say that to me, they say, if God is so good, why did He let this happen to me? I say to them, congratulations, you just gave the devil his victory. That's what he wants to take place. He wants you to blame him for the evil I bring in the world. And you did it. You fell hook, line, and sinker for the devil's trick, and you let him reel you in. But if instead we turn to God and say, Lord, strengthen me, help me through this trial, then we take the evil that Satan brings to try to get us away from God and only turns it into bringing us further into the Lord's embrace. And we defeat the devil with his own weapons. Do you see that? The devil brings evil, hoping we'll curse God, and instead we only use it to bring us closer to God. We're defeating the devil with his own weapons. And that's what the Lord tells us to do. Why He allows us to endure struggles. But He promises, I will always be there with you. I am always with you. Do not be afraid. Thinking of that scene of Jesus clutching Peter. I've got you. I'm with you. I will not let you down. I am with you always. And so that's what we need to do in the struggles and the trials and the storms of our life. Turn to the Lord and say, Lord, help me find you in the midst of all this. Because in doing that, we will grow closer to the Lord, and we will use the devil's weapons against himself. We will destroy him and bring our souls into His kingdom. And we will know the peace that only He can bring. And if there should be ever anybody who would say to me, well, Father, can you give me just one example of somebody whose faith got them through difficulties in life? Show me one person whose faith made a difference for them, that got them through difficult times and made them better people. I will give you just one name, Joan Manghisi. Today, Joan Carrozza, my mother. My mother did not have a very easy childhood. She was born, of course, 90 years ago today. That's 1936. And she was the youngest of 6 children. Her oldest brother was 21 years old when she was born, and the next in line was 12. So my grandmother back then had raised 5 children and probably figured with a 12-year-old being her youngest that, well, she's finished bearing children into the world. But at 41 years old, in 1936, she conceived my mother. And back in 1936, a 41-year-old woman having a baby, they considered that very dangerous. They didn't have the medicine we have today. But my mother survived, and to make it even worse on that, to show that I think there was a miracle going on here, when my grandmother was only 7 months pregnant with my mother, she received news one day that her brother had suddenly died. And that grief threw her into labor. And she gave birth to my mother prematurely, at only 7 months old, but weighing only a pound or 2. Again, 1936, a 1 or 2 pound baby surviving, very slim chances. But it was as if God said, no, she is to survive, because He has a reason for her to be here on this earth. And she did survive, thankfully. And as she grew older, my mother says, her mother began to dote on her. Maybe because she was her baby of her older age. And she also completed the set now. She had now 3 boys and 3 girls. So it was a nice even set. But my mother says she spoiled her, and she doted on her, and she loved her very much. And her other brothers and sisters by now were all out of the house, so she was the only one home at this point. And the other one she had that doted on her a lot was her brother Peter. And Peter was in the Navy. And every time he would go to a different port of call, he would bring home something for his little baby sister and bring special presents to my mother. So my mother had her mother and her brother that doted on her. But tragedy struck. When my mother was only 8 years old, World War II was going on, my uncle was in the Navy, and one time when he came home, it was my mother did not want to let him go. She almost had a premonition that something bad would happen if he went back, and she says no, she wouldn't let him leave. She hid his duffel bag so that he couldn't find it, hoping to keep him. But he said to her, Joan, no, he goes, I have to go, I have a duty, I have to go back to the Navy. And he left. But she had this bad premonition, and her premonition came true. Just a week before Christmas, his ship was with a whole bunch of others on their way in a refueling out in the South Pacific en route to Iwo Jima, and they were hit by a typhoon which sunk many ships, and his ship among them. And my mother was actually even the one who heard the news on the radio and had to go in and tell her parents, Mom, Dad, Peter's ship was sunk. And so she became the bearer of the news to Dad. So she, at 8 years old, lost her beloved brother very suddenly, that she kind of knew something like this was going to happen. And my grandmother apparently never really overcame the grief of losing her son in the war. And 3 years later, at only 52 years old, she died very suddenly. So my mother, at 8 years old, lost her brother. When my mother was only 11 years old, her mother died, leaving her without the 2 people that doted on her the most. So her love support was totally gone by 11 years old. To make things worse, my grandfather, being your typical old Italian man who can't do anything for himself, needed someone to cook for him. So he went out very quickly and found another woman somewhere. I don't know where he found her, but just found this woman to marry him so he had somebody to cook and clean for him. And the family has always referred to her as the Wicked Witch of the West. My cousins would agree. And she made life miserable on my mother. It seems she did not like the fact that she had to share my grandfather's affections with his daughter. And my mother told me stories of how she would listen at night of her telling all these lies to my grandfather about the things that she supposedly said and did, which of course never happened, and she was making life miserable on my mother. Now my grandfather, they lived in Washington Heights, right by the George Washington Bridge. And my grandfather owned a barber shop over in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. And every day he would walk across the George Washington Bridge to his shop. And my mother, one day at 16 years old, walked over the bridge to see her father. And she told me the story once as she got about halfway across the George Washington Bridge, and she looked down and said, if I just threw myself down here right now, she couldn't hurt me anymore. But right away she said, no. She goes, that would be a sin. She goes, this woman is ruining my earthly life. She's not going to ruin my eternal life. She's not going to steal heaven from me. And she said she prayed and said, Lord, please strengthen me. Show me what I need to do. And she says it became obvious to her then what she had to do was she had to move out. And she told her father at 16 years old, I'm moving out. And she moved in one by one with her other brothers and sisters, the 4 remaining ones, who took care of her, each one for a little while. And she did that for at least 3 years. When she was 19 years old, she was living with her brother Luke, and getting whatever support she got from them. They saw her through high school, and just biding time, if you were, I guess, in her life for things to change. And everything changed very dramatically on one night, April the 7th, 1956. The night she was invited to a party by her friend Tom Kelly. And she didn't want to go to this party because Tom had been wanting to introduce her to this friend of hers. And she says, I don't want to meet any of his friends. His friends are all losers. No, I don't want to go. It was pouring rain. And my uncle said to her, you are not staying here in this apartment all night. You are going to that party. So she went to the party, had to take 2 buses to get there. And by the time she got to the apartment, she said she looked like a drowned rat. And so she rang the doorbell, and as soon as they opened the door, she walks in, soaking wet, and standing right next to Tom is Tony Carosa, who became my father. And And my mother says she looked at him right away and says, and gave him a charmed, I'm sure, as I can imagine her doing. And she says, I have to go to the bathroom and freshen up. Would you please excuse me? And as she went to the bathroom, Tom turned to my father and said, so what do you think about Joan? And he says, great, I'm going to marry her. And the next morning, they went on their first date. She stayed with her friend Colette in her apartment. And it was a Sunday morning, and their first date was they went to Mass together. And my mother had no money. He gave her money to put into the collection basket. And as they say, the rest is history. 3 years later, they got married. And finally, once she met my father, she had someone who doted on her once again and gave her all the love that she needed, had been deprived because of the loss of her mother and her brother. And my father, 70 years now, they know each other, and he still dotes on her to this very day. And she was not by any means unaware of the fact that God was at work through all of this. She told me, she goes, I knew God was doing this. In fact, maybe she realized she had to go through all of that grief and suffering to appreciate the gift of my father coming into her life. And that strengthened her. And she shared that with us, her children, over and over again. She told me all of these stories and how her faith strengthened her. And that's a good reason, a good part of why I have become a priest, was because of my mother's influence on me. That hearing how she got through all of those difficulties in her life as a child strengthened me to be able to say, you know what? God works in our lives even at times when we don't think he's working, when we think he's absent because we're dealing with some struggling. And my mother, being that way, was the type that ended up sharing her faith naturally with others. She wanted the Lord to do for them what he had done for her. And she was unashamed, unafraid to go out and talk about faith to other people. People who maybe had abandoned their faith, had no faith at all. She would talk to them and say, hey, why don't you start coming back to church? Don't you think you need Jesus? Don't you think you need God in your life? You're going to make it without him? And I could tell you many different stories about her, so much so that I always jokingly called her, say, Joan the Evangelist. But I'll tell you just two stories that are poignant to what we're talking about today. One, after I was ordained, she got a job working in a religious house with a particular order of women religious. I won't mention the name of the religious order, but a particular order where many of the members of this order were on the more progressive, liberal side of things, shall we say, and maybe got bitten too much by the feminism bug. And she would come home every day, and she had no experience of nuns like that. The nuns she knew growing up were the old strict type. She had no experience of the liberated nuns of the world today. And she would come home and tell me all of these things about what these nuns were saying and doing. She goes, I can't believe it. They say this, they deny these basic things about the faith. And I said, yeah, Mom, welcome to the liberalized world of religious women these days. Unfortunately, while many of them have kept the faith, sadly there are others who have not. And one she told me about, at Christmas time, they were upset with her because she had a little nativity set on her desk and had a Merry Christmas sign. And the sister said to her, oh, you can't put that there because some of the people in our that work for us are Muslims and they might be offended by that. And my mother said to her, but this is a Catholic institution. Shouldn't they be used to seeing Catholic things? Why are we going to be afraid to have Catholic things in a Catholic institution? And she kept denying it to my mother. Oh, no, we can't offend anybody. And my mother said, she told me, because, you know, we're in this life, we're supposed to be dedicated to serving Jesus and bringing him to the ends of the earth, and you're denying him. And you're, for fear of being unliked by others, of offending someone, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. You're not preaching Jesus to them. And she told me that, and I said, you go, girl. You know, she was not afraid to come out and spoke what she did. I know the sisters didn't like that very much, but she was the conscience to them. And another story, the most poignant of all, was 30-some-odd years ago. She was diagnosed with a tumor on her kidney, the size of a cantaloupe. And she was able to get into Memorial Sloan Kettering in Manhattan. And while she was there, I came down to anoint her. I was ordained already. And she goes, oh, I wish God would heal me. I said, well, God is going to heal you. The surgeons and everything, you know, this is what's going to happen. She goes, well, can't you just rub your hand over the spot and have it go away? I said, well, sometimes God does work that way, and if he does, wonderful, but if he doesn't, he'll heal you through the doctors. So she said, okay, and I anointed her, and yes, she was healed. They removed the kidney and all the lymph nodes leading up to it, and she's been cancer-free ever since, never needed chemo, radiation, anything like that. While she was there was a woman in the other bed who was absolutely frightened of her cancer. And she started a conversation with my mother. And my mother spoke to her, found out she was Catholic, and she said, well, don't you have faith in Jesus? Don't you believe in him? And she said, well, I don't really go to church or anything like that. And my mother started just talking to her, repeating some of the things I had told her. God will heal you through the doctors. Have faith in him. You've got to trust in him. And she talked her through. After my mother was discharged, she got a letter from this woman. She had actually asked the nurses for my mother's home address if she could send her a letter thanking her. And she said, thank you so much. You got me through that. It was your faith that helped me get it through. I'll never forget that you were there for me, what you did, and I've started going back to church again. And that has been the woman that has been my inspiration as a priest, of being faithful to Christ over and over again and reminding people the struggles, the storms that come our way, they always strengthen us. And they prove our faith. They prove the reality of it, that we truly are disciples of the Lord, where we can deal with difficulties and not get angry at the Lord, but instead turn to him and say, Lord, help me through it. And my mother showed me to do that each and every day of my life, and she's been a hero to me for that. So Mom, today, on your 90th birthday, you're here with your family and friends, all of your children, your grandchildren, even your great-granddaughter is here. I saw them coming in the back. And your nieces and nephews and all of your friends are here. And we're all here to show you how much we love you. And we want to thank you for the beauty of your singing gift, first of all. My mother had a very beautiful singing voice. She could have been on Broadway. In fact, she actually had the opportunity to be in a Broadway show once years ago. My father was friends with Eddie Foy Jr., and he had them all arranged that she had to just show up at the theater, and she was going to be in the chorus of a Broadway show, but she chickened out. But every time she sings, somebody says, you should have been on Broadway. And indeed, she has a beautiful singing voice. We thank you for the memories you've given us with that. We thank you for the love and the happiness you have shown us. Thank you for being a model of good Christian faith to each and every one of us. Mom, we are proud of you. We love you. Happy 90th birthday.